Hi, Leigh.
Hi. I'm happy to see you.
I'm happy to see you too. We already had a little talk in the green room. Got the salacious stuff out of the way.
Yeah, I had to put my glasses on because I can't actually see more than 10 feet in front of me. But I'm so happy to be the moderator, so I'm going to actually talk about how wonderful you are. My book is not even pubbed. It doesn't even come out for 2 weeks. But Megan and I have been virtual friends for quite a while. We've run into each other. I've read all of her books, including this one. And I was just talking about how we saw each other at AWP 5 years ago, and she looked at me. She was sitting perched in a little horrible Marriott hotel bar.
Cute.
I know. And she said, "I'm Megan. I like rural stories," or something. And I was like, "I'm really rural." And we got along. So actually, when we were walking down the stairs, she said, "Should we open with goats?" I thought, yes. Let's open with goats.
Yeah. Do you guys want to hear about goats?
Yeah.
Yeah. I have two. And you have some.
I have imaginary goats.
Imaginary goats. Yeah. Which are easier to maintain, I've heard.
Well, both of us live in farmhouses that are dilapidated, and she has a dog. I have chickens, and I have dogs, and I have cats, and you have goats and dogs.
We both have children
and children
and chickens.
And chickens.
Mm-hmm.
But the weird thing also was that I named my imaginary goat Radish. Yep. And guess what her dog's name is?
It's
Radish.
Yeah. It's a solid name.
Yeah, and I even went so far, because I don't have a barn. My barn was bought by a very wealthy man. And he paid $1 million for that barn.
Good for you.
And no, not to me. He paid it to the old doddering man that owned my farm, and he sold the barn, yes, to the rich man who owns Citibank.
Right.
The old man was like, "Your farmhouse is a terrible investment," and just wanted the barn. So I don't have anywhere to put the goats. That's why I don't have them.
Right. We can work on that.
We can.
Yeah.
So I went to my neighbor and said, "I'm going to get a goat named Radish and another one named Penelope. And can I store them in your barn?" And she said yes.
She sounds flexible and open-minded.
She's great. Her name's Donna Murphy. And then COVID hit.
Oh.
And she was like, "Just stay away from me."
Yeah, yeah. My goats are Otis and Pearl, and Pearl was described as a goat genius to us because she escapes. She comes from a long line of escaping goats, so she's known for that. And then Otis is a male goat, and they gave him to us because they said he would never be sexually successful. So I have a goat genius.
You know what? That's a resume you want.
I know, it is.
That is, it's just like special skills.
Right.
French, Microsoft Word, sexually unsuccessful.
Right. Unthreatening.
I will say, she's such a good writer. So do you mind if you read a little bit?
I don't mind. Now that we warmed up with the goats.
Yeah.
It was good. I told her I didn't want to start with a precious poet voice or something right at the beginning. It would set a weird tone.
No, it's always awful when the people read it's spoken word.
Yeah.
And you don't know what to do.
Yeah.
And so, you know what's worse is when you do it.
Well, I think
and then you're going,
I think I might.
I'm reading in a really awful voice.
I'm over here feeling nervous about that.
No, you're going to be so good.
All right. So Leigh and I were talking about the story Peaches 1979, which is it's an origin story without being an origin story. So I was born in this really glamorous place called Gaffney, South Carolina, that's known for the Peach Water Tower. You guys have probably seen it on, what was the TV show with Kevin Spacey before he got canceled? House of Cards. I think the iconic Peach Water Tower is in that, maybe on an Allman Brothers album, something. Yeah, so that's my origin point. And I was researching it. I only lived there for 6 months. And apparently there was an active serial killer when I was born, and I thought, that's weird. So that's where the story comes from. Is that creepy?
No, because I'm just going to say a little aside as a critical reader. I think sometimes with things like serial killers, people mishandle them and they make that the center of the story. And you did not, in fact. It's out there on the outskirts. And then the real story is about this woman and her sister and her brother and her mother.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to say anymore.
Yeah.
But it's my favorite story in the collection.
Well, I'll read a little bit, just a little. So this is Peaches, 1979. The telltale yellowing of the leaves. The soil so dry it felt coarse in her hands. A knot of doom in her gut warning her that the harvest was going to fail. Darcy prayed for rain and in the morning walked the rows of contorted trees, sipping coffee and applying a strip of orange paint to any dead trunks the way her father had done before he died 2 years ago. Peaches needed the hot nights, don't we all?
Yes.
But they also needed water, and the farm had gone weeks now without meaningful rain. Shit, she said to herself, my first year in charge and the orchard withers into a pile of sticks. That evening after work, Darcy turned the key in her father's old Chevy, the steering wheel still hot enough to burn her hands. She headed toward the Weeks farm, a Christian boarding house for women, a few miles from the town center, off of Route 29. Her older sister Beth had lived there for several years, and Darcy was perpetually overdue for a visit. She had something on her mind, other than the parched family orchard. There'd been a string of murders in town, 3, and Darcy was getting nervous about Beth living far away from home. She was kind but vulnerable, big blonde hair, dimples. Beth bought every bogus magazine subscription, filled the offering plate at church, and said yes to every creep who made a pass. Was she not the easiest of targets? Darcy rolled the truck windows down. Warm wind rifled through years of registration papers and fertilizer receipts paper-clipped to the visor. The light was falling, and the blue hour came on. It was always Darcy's loneliest point, that elegant hour when she wanted more for herself. Better company, a different job, a family she didn't have to look after. If only she'd stayed away from Gaffney after college, she'd give any ambitious young person that advice now. Don't go back home, thinking you can leave again. Your stoic father will up and die of lung cancer. Your evangelical mother will beg you to keep things going. And your good-for-nothing brother will pawn the family silver and sell fireworks out of the truck he lives in. Beth, well, who could fault Beth for anything? Darcy drove past farm stands, clapboard churches, kudzu-strangled billboards, and old white houses with blazing pink azalea bushes out front. Her auburn curls were pulled back in a loose ponytail. She pushed her sunglasses up and onto the top of her head as the light faded. The truck's turn signal was loud, a coarse, rhythmic ticking that stayed in her mind even after she flicked it off. Darcy came to the turn and knew the Weeks place by its barren and brown pastures, discarded tractors, sun-bleached American flag, the caved-in barn roof. As she slowed the truck, she noticed a cow lying alone in the mud. Its neck looked funny, abnormally sunken toward the ground. Was it dead? She stopped and stepped out of the truck. As her foot pressed into the dry grass, a few flies circled up from the earth and she swatted them away. You okay? She called out, knowing it was a stupid thing to say to a cow, dead or not. The cow did not lift its head or try to rise, but she thought she saw it breathing, a barely perceptible rise and fall in the rib cage. Then she saw its back leg move upward and come to rest on swollen udders. What could she do? Maybe I'll tell Miss Barbara, she thought, getting back into her truck and pulling farther up the dirt driveway. A barn cat dashed in front of her as she parked next to the house with cinder-block stairs and salmon-colored siding. She knocked on the front door. No one answered, so she opened the door and called out, Beth? Stop. There.
No, I love Beth.
Do you want more Beth?
Yeah, just like
Okay,
one more
little
paragraph of her
more
eating
Beth?
cereal with
Okay.
the other lady.
It's good to have a coach. I hate long readings, so I always cut it short. All right. There was a light on in the kitchen, and Darcy walked down a dark, carpeted hall to find Beth and another girl sitting at a table. The house smelled like beef broth and cigarettes, and Beth stood up from the rickety kitchen table, smiling. Her thick blonde hair hung down to her shoulders, and bangs fell across her eyebrows. She wiped her hands on her jeans and reached out to give Darcy a hug. So I'm thinking about when I wrote this story, and I actually came across a dying cow on a run, as one does in a rural small town in Vermont. And I tried to go up to the house. I tried to be brave. I tried to engage with the cow and actually had a stupid conversation with the cow, like the character does. And then I went up to a house and knocked on the door and was trying to tell them, I think you have a suffering cow. And no one came to the door.
Nobody cares.
Yeah. So that's kind of where.
But when you say origin story,
yeah,
I don't know what that means.
Yeah. I mean, I think.
Like you did not grow up in this town.
No, I was just born there. I lived there for 6 months.
Okay.
Yeah, and I don't know it. And so I think sometimes narrative is a way to write into something you don't know, to try and maybe uncover something about it. I teach a class at Middlebury called Landscape and Memory, and we're often talking about epigenetics, which is the idea that the kind of stress and trauma and impact of environment that your ancestors went through actually leaves a genetic imprint. And we talk about how to conjure the sort of landscape memory and early formative landscapes. And so I think I'm often trying to do that in the work.
Yes.
Yeah.
You said that so eloquently. I'm just going to put it on my hair.
Okay.
But when you say origin story, do you mean that's my origin of my person, or do you mean origin like that's where my collection came out of?
Oh.
I started writing that story, and then I started thinking about all the other ones.
Yeah, origin of almost myself, of just this, what is this small textile-oriented peach orchard, Piedmont, South Carolinian town in 1979. I lived 7 days in the 70s. I was born December 23rd, 1979. I think it shows a little bit, just that little bit of 70s.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah, and so I'm curious about it.
Did you go back there to write the story?
Heck no.
You were right in your mind. But this is the really good thing, because it is so rich in details.
I did spend some years near there, so I do know it. I'm fronting a little bit, but not while writing the collection. I didn't go back.
So Beth is also a little slow, the sister, and they get into some hijinks together.
They do. Yeah, she's trusting and loving.
And wonderful.
Mm-hmm. And I hate that those characteristics become problematic. I think there are people that seek those out and take advantage of them. I think I have some of that myself in some ways.
Are you
just
kidding?
like a sense of, I don't know, I have both actually. I can be somewhat cynical and I can also be overly trusting. So
probably that's a mark of a writer, right? Isn't it like high self-esteem, low self-esteem?
Yeah.
High guard, low, just open me up.
Yeah.
My grandmother lived in Atmore, Alabama, and she was flim-flammed. That's what she would say.
It's a great word.
Flim-flammed all the time. And I got flim-flammed.
You did?
Just last week.
Who flim-flammed you?
Some man saying that my phone was going to be cut off unless I sent him a Venmo.
That's your big heart. I get flim-flammed all the time.
Do you really? I got totally No, he said, send it by, not Venmo, Zella.
Oh.
Yeah.
And you had that. You were ready.
No, I didn't have it. And the bank said, we're not going to give it to you because you're too dumb.
So
I didn't actually get flim-flammed. The bank stopped it. But yeah. So it is interesting to me, though. We're saying origin story, and this is the origin of who you are, and that story is so amazing. But what's interesting to me about the book is how many different settings you were able to master. I mean, one was in New York, and one was in Italy, and one was, I don't remember where the lake one was.
Adirondacks, Lake George.
Lake George. And then I'm just, I can actually just look through the stories, and there was Peaches, and there's Indigo Run on the old plantation. I don't remember what state that was in.
South Carolina.
South Carolina, that was. And then the Night Hag. The Night Hag was very different. So how did you do all these different locations and honestly do them very well?
Thank you for saying I did them well.
You did. They were very vivid.
Yeah. A lot of them I have spent significant time in. So my partner loves camping on Lake George, and he's been doing it ever since he was younger. And so we spend a week there on a rattlesnake-infested island in the middle of Lake George.
Wow.
And it's exquisite, it's beautiful, and I calculated that I had spent several months of my life now camping in the Adirondacks, which is strange to me.
It adds up.
Yeah, it adds up. But so that environment, I felt like I knew it in a sensory way, which I think I either have to be deeply intrigued or have some sensory awareness of it.
I think sensory awareness is what I was hearing too, just as you read it, about this smells, when you said the boarding house smelled of beef broth and cigarettes. Ooh.
Yeah, pass.
But I mean, that's all you really need, right? Like one good sense, and you're like, wow, I'm not going to live there. But I get where she's living. Well, that's going to be a thing for her.
Someone told me that typically we underutilize the senses when we write and when we describe. And so I've been carrying that thought with me a while. And I'm also a smeller.
Me too.
Yeah.
Actually, that's something we have in common.
Yeah, I'm
we
not
have
surprised.
so many things in common.
Yeah.
Not actual real goats.
Yeah.
but smells. And then also, I do want you to talk a little bit about, so one of my favorite things about reading this book was there's no woman in here who's like a professor or a lawyer or a teacher, or I don't know what ordinary professions are. I really don't, because I'm a writer. But her person was like a floral art designer, a long-distance swimmer, a ranch owner that actually was an archaeologist and just created like a I don't know what you call that, where she invited rich people to come and dig stuff out of the earth. An orchard keeper, and then I said a plantation inheritor, and then I put hag. Actually,
Right.
the last narrator is a professional hag.
Strong vocation.
I'm just
Yeah.
saying, I often read stories and I just don't believe the job of the person. I don't believe it at all.
Mm-hmm.
And it's upsetting to me because it is weird, right? Like when you watch a movie and someone's supposed to be in marketing or something, and they go to a tower and they work in marketing,
Right.
and you can tell that that person's never worked in marketing. Or conversely, and I do love books about university because I've never been full-time there, but they work at a university and they like just talk about university. But it's really interesting that you were able to create like completely original and fascinating jobs, A, and B, I believe them. How did you do that?
I'm sort of impressed you believe them, because as you were reading them out, I wondered if I believed them. But
Yeah, like long distance swimming.
right, yeah, that's based on a person in my not in my life, but in somebody I've been fascinated by. There are things that catch my eye. You must be this way too, where you mind your environment and then there's something that like flashes where you're like, that's my lane,
Yes.
So like right now, there's a man who drives, I live next to a really spooky, haunted New England graveyard with like, topsy-turvy marble headstones. And there's an old man that drives this purple compact car into the historic graveyard every day, and he's got a giant husky that's like spilling out of the side of the car. And he pays a visit to his wife's grave every morning. But it's it's aesthetically interesting to me, it's tender, and there's something about it where I haven't written it yet, but I know it's my lane.
Yes,
I don't know what
Do
his
you feel
vocation
like
is
sometimes
yet,
in life actually things, I'm going to say this is going to sound weird and maybe childish. I actually feel like when I have moments like that, sometimes it gets sparkly, and I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but it's like some weird biological slide goes into my brain, and it'll be like to be picked up later.
Absolutely. I think it's a skill. I think learning how to notice that and file it away, for those of you who write or aspire to write, that's one of the best things you can do is just
And
know
as
what
you get
lights
older,
up.
you realize you don't have to worry about it so much.
Yeah.
Like I remember I used to keep lists of like these moments and try and write them down just in case I ran out of ideas. But as you get older, you realize, oh, I'm writing something and that goes here. Then you keep going.
I'm impressed with your brain. I don't know that I remember it. I always have my best thoughts like 3 miles into a 6-mile run when I have no access to paper and I have to just sing a song to myself until I get back.
Oh, for sure.
to try
I grew
and
up in
remember
Alaska.
it.
We had to sing songs so we wouldn't get killed by bears.
Right. The stakes were higher for you, Leigh.
The stakes were higher for me last summer. Yes.
I was going to say, on the vocation thing, I worked with Amy Hempel in my MFA program, and she always said, don't forget that people work. Don't forget that people have jobs.
Yeah.
And it's also such an interesting way to reveal something about character, because what a heavy choice. And choice has such narrative power.
Right.
I think you're really good about characters, and I want to talk about something you do with characters.
Lord.
So when I teach at Middlebury, when I teach character development, because that's one of the things I think that makes or breaks a story.
For sure.
And James Wood's book, How Fiction Works, he talks about how Hawthorne created a character, a man with red whiskers who always had to enter the door first. And it's very economic, but it's physical. And you have so many of those in your first story. I was just circling them as I went through because I'm going to teach them. And would you gift us with?
Yes, I
maybe
would.
a reading?
Gift us is a really wonderful, that's a good verb. Thank you.
Listen and learn.
Okay, so this is a story called Hal Palace. I almost My book is called Nobody Gets Out Alive, but I almost called this book Hal Palace. But it's really hard to pronounce, actually, if you say it. Mm-hmm. So we walked away from that. And I will say that it's set on a lake in Alaska where everybody owns a float plane, like a plane. It's out and back. It's kind of a suburban lake. And, you know, no surprise, I grew up on a lake like this, although none of the people in here are the people I know. But I was thinking about a person in particular who's very different from this narrator and what it would be like to be a single woman on this lake. And actually, I only know one. Mm-hmm. And she's nothing like the person I wrote about. She's extremely elegant. But I think the feeling was there. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Where mm-hmm. you're just that person that drove in with the purple car.
Yeah.
Hal Palace. This September, I finally put Hal Palace up for sale. Years of poor financial planning had led to this decision, and I tried to take some comfort in my agent's belief in a buyer who might show up with an all-cash offer. My real estate agent, Silver, was a highly organized, sensible woman who grew up in Alaska. I checked. But when she advertised the listing, she failed to mention in her description on the internet, attractively priced teardown with a plane dock and amazing lake views, she wrote under the photo. Investment potential. I am still puzzled why the word teardown upsets me. Anybody who buys a house on Diamond Lake brings in a backhoe and raises the place to rubble. The mud along the shoreline wreaks havoc with the foundations, and the original homes like mine were built in the 1960s, before the pipeline, back when licensed contractors had no reason to move to Anchorage. If you wanted a house, you either built it yourself or you hung out in the parking lot of Spenard Builder Supply, handing out six-packs to every guy with a table saw in the back of his vehicle, until one got broke enough or bored enough to consider your blueprints. Which is why the walls at Hal Palace meet the ceiling at such unconventional angles. Our guy liked to eyeball instead of using a level. To the families on the lake, my home is a bit of an institution, and not just because of the wolf room, which Silver suggested we leave off the list of amenities, as most people wouldn't understand what we meant. About the snow machine shed and the Clamshell Grotto, I am less flexible. Nobody likes a yard strewn with snow machines and three-wheelers, one or two of which will always be busted and covered in blue tarp. Ours is just not that kind of neighborhood. The Clamshell Grotto, on the other hand, might fail to fulfill your basic homeowning needs, but it is a showstopper. My fourth husband, Lon, built it for me in the basement as a surprise for my 53rd birthday. He had a romantic nature when he hadn't had too much to drink. Embedded in the coral and shells are more than a few freshwater pearls that a future owner might consider tempting enough to jackhammer out of the cement. Silver brought me a box of Girl Scout cookies to discuss these matters, and so I tried my hardest to trust the rest of her advice. When she said not to bother with pulling out the chickweed or flattening the rusted remnants of the dog runs, I left both as is. But then I started thinking about what people would say about baking blueberry muffins and burning vanilla candles. Buyers needed to feel the atmosphere of the place, the hominess. Fred Meyer had some plug-in tropical air fresheners on sale. I bought a few. I shoved them into the outlets. Within minutes, the entire downstairs smelled like a burning car wreck in Hawaii. Silver scheduled the first open house for the Saturday in September. Noon, she said, before families had put their kids down for a nap. The night before, I lay back in my recliner and thought how every good thing that had ever happened to me had happened at Hal Palace. And every bad thing, too. 43 years, 5 husbands, 2 float planes, a lifetime. It felt as if I should honor my home, that strangers shouldn't come around poking through the kitchen or kicking the baseboards, seeing only the mold in the hot tub or the gnaw marks on the cabinets from the dogs I'd had over the years, maybe even laughing at the name. Hal Palace was coined by Jamie Donovan, Danny Bob Donovan's little daughter, during a New Year's Eve party in 1977. She said it with awe, standing in the middle of the wolf room with a half-eaten candy cane. Mrs. Dutch, she said, "This is so beautiful. I think I need to howl a little." and how she did, cupping her hands around her mouth and letting loose a wild, lonely cry that endeared me to her forever. Hal Palace was still beautiful in my mind, and could be to other people given the right welcome. Silverhead said just to relax, let her finesse the details, but buyers needed to experience how the house would feel if they lived in it. Friends coming over, kids in the backyard pitching mud chunks at mallards, a little music going on the speakers. I went to the locker freezer and pulled out 50 pounds of caribou burger, plus 4 dozen moose dogs. All we needed now were a few side dishes and some buns.
There's a character that's about to make an appearance that has this tagline that I can't stop thinking about, and I might get it wrong.
Yeah.
He was the heartbreak of my life instead of the love of my life.
Yeah.
I mean, we all have that one, right?
Yeah.
Is that the phrasing of it?
I just don't remember what I write, but I know that she'd had 5 husbands.
Yeah.
And I know Carl wasn't my husband. Carl was the beautiful, bedeviling heartbreak of my life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that line.
Thanks, me too. He's a real jackass.
Yeah, he is. He is.
Isn't it hard? Those are the ones you long for. You
Yeah.
never marry them, but you long for them.
Yeah, I get that. Maybe I shouldn't say more because we're being recorded.
Honestly, yeah. And you're married, yeah. But okay, we'll go on by.
Yeah. What is your philosophy when it comes to making a good character or characterization? Do you have one?
I do not think about character development, and I do not think about setting. I do think about language. So most of character starts for me on the first line. If I can nail the first line, the story is ready to roll. Sometimes it'll fall out, right? You know, like you write 25 stories, you save 5.
Yeah.
But I can't even get going on the train unless I find a voice. And it's very rare. This story is exceptionally different for me in that I rarely write from the I perspective. I like a third person close, the way you do. But even within a third person close or limited, there's a voice there, right? So they have a language. And then once you have the language, for me, the way they speak, then I'm ready to roll. And most of the character development comes out of that voice, and you know, like what kind of what clothes they wear. I don't care what kind of clothes they wear, and I don't care what their hair color is. I don't care those things. But I feel like most of character is vibe. You know, like on social media, like several people wrote me like, Megan's a Spitfire. And then when I met you, I was like, that is correct.
I'm a gentle Spitfire.
You are. You're a gentle Spitfire.
Yeah.
Right. But
Right.
you could make up that sentence, right? Megan was a gentle Spitfire. Someone would not have written that, but that's who you are. Right? And I think that's the clue to making characters, like that, like really weird, specific, like the spiritual nature of a person, and just writing a sentence that gets it, or a piece of dialogue, or a first sentence, and then that's it.
Does that come to you at 2 a.m.? That's when it comes to me, like voice, or when I make the decision between first and third.
Yeah.
It's 2 a.m. It's like when the story is starting to take life in my head, and that's when I know. When does it come to you?
I bang away at stories over and over again for the first 10 pages. Once I get that 10 pages and I know who the people are, and generally where we are, 2 in the morning, or I would love to be one of those people that say I write so well 5 in the morning, but I don't.
No, nor do I.
No. And actually, like, I don't smoke anymore, but I take this nicotine gum, and it just, 2 in the morning, it really kicks in.
Wow.
And then,
Tip.
yeah.
Pro tip.
No, it's horrible. It is like 2 in the morning. But then once I get the first 10 pages, I know that I'm stuck. I'm not going to make any progress. And that's when I go to Alaska during the summer and I finish all the stories.
I was going to say, my picture of Leigh writing is often in a remote cabin with a giant ass can of bear spray.
That's a real thing.
Yeah, I know. I feel like I've seen a picture of it, but to me, you only ever exist there.
Yeah, it's true. Wouldn't it be nice? But for 4 weeks every year, I move to remote Alaska. I live in a cabin with a giant ass thing of bear spray, and actually have a huge fence around it to keep the bears from coming in and, quite frankly, monkeying with me. And it's because of my friend. I go home and stay with her.
I like the verb monkeying. The bears are monkeying with you.
Oh, yeah.
That seems like
they're very big, and they are not.
Yeah.
You're not interesting. You're not a threat to them.
Wow.
They're just like, wow, it's a badminton. You're like a human badminton thing.
Wow.
What's a badminton
A birdie?
Yeah, you're a badminton birdie.
Mm-hmm. That's my nickname. That's why I felt a little weird saying it. That's why I paused.
Yeah, can we talk about birds?
Oh, birds? Yeah, I do. I do like birds.
Yeah.
I do. Yeah.
I want to talk about some other things. Do you mind?
I don't mind. I'd love
Because
to.
some of your characters, not only the women are writing about these in different situations and different scenarios, and they are also like have amazing jobs that you fall in love with, and that's part of the journey, right? They're interesting jobs. It's like a vacation for the reader. Like, what would it be like, to fill a terrarium with hothouse orchids, But also they say things that are like not necessarily, and especially in our current environment, they say things that are a little bit, that makes you not like them but love them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So like one of them says, and I'm with her, I mean, I wasn't supposed, okay, wait, this was her husband who was a big alcoholic or I wasn't supposed to take any of it personally. Addiction was a disease, people told me, as if I were wrong for feeling hurt. What wife had I been anyway? I hadn't even realized how hungry Zach was. Starving, my therapist later told me. But aren't we all, I said. Were your parents particularly empathetic, she asked. Suspicious. There were so many moments where you made them a little bit unlikable, but that made them so much more likable. Did you do that on purpose?
I did. I mean, that's I think an artistic intention and also a lesson learned that I think really crystallizes when I teach, because I always tell my students perfection is not interesting because there's no way for the reader to get in. And I also think it's important intellectually for women to throw their elbows out a little bit on the page and in movies, to be unlikable, to have range. I also, just back to the job thing, there's like a secret philosophy about power and labor sort of wandering through the book, just about how we create wealth or gather power, or what we do when we can't, or when there are restrictions in place or constraints. That's something that fascinates me, just the dynamics that jobs create in relationships and society, and that they're a form of pressure in some ways.
They are, like how you solve that nut.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact is that when you absent it from a story, the person becomes that less one-dimensional. Mm-hmm. It's almost like when I used to watch movies and I'd be like, well, they're talking, and they're stopping by each other's houses, and no one's going to the bathroom.
Right.
And then I felt like Hollywood figured out we have to have women peeing.
Yeah.
And the first time I ever saw it was on this movie in the 90s. I can't remember. But I've now noticed that when they're trying to be gritty and real, they have a woman pee.
Right. They check that box.
They do. She's like, do you have any toilet paper?
Oh, and it makes her human?
Yeah. But it's a shortcut, because it was already done that one time.
I think another shortcut people use is if someone's too savage of a character, they have them pet a dog. It's like a shortcut to they're not
emotional
totally
complexity.
Inhuman.
Yeah. That first movie was called Truck Stops, Road Stops. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? Gas stations? Oh, it's an indie movie. Anyway, here's a sentence that I feel like it. She likes complexity. She likes knowing that people are as fucked up as she is. I kind of love that too, right? That's something low.
It's sort of a relief, isn't it? When you get to like whatever age in adulthood where you have that realization, where you realize you're human, your parents were human, your partner's human. I don't know, the de-idealization of everyone in your life, including yourself.
Yeah.
That's kind of terrifying.
Well, that's the interesting thing. I mean, it's not just that you made the characters and the female characters say things that were, I don't know how you do that. It's like the opposite, right? Distancing, but yet make you closer because they're so awful that you love them more. But also it was like you were able to embed like wisdom in your stories. There was always a line in every story that had like a larger comment on humanity, which is something I always look for. I want someone to tell me what to do. Or I want someone to bring up a question like, oh my God, I don't know what to do, but at least I'm going to bring up this problem, and then you can sit there with it. So this is what I liked about this one, which was called The Heirloom. So in The Heirloom, it's like this woman inherits a ranch, and it's like busted, and so she gets an excavator, and she hires rich hedge fund men to come and like dig holes and like just break things. And then the heirloom is that she puts like a tiny little historic thing in the ground that they can find. They can feel triumphant that they found a real artifact. But in this moment of clarity, it has nothing to do with that story. It just says, this is what happened, wasn't it, she thought. People were engaged in a cycle of coming and going, perpetually deciding to stay or leave. Sometimes they returned after a mental absence, you never knowing they'd left in the first place. You never knowing they'd left in the first place? Ow. Lying next to you in the dark, as she did with Keenan, thinking of life on the other side. Wow. How'd you get there?
Well, that's a deep question.
Was that at 2 in the morning, I guess?
Yeah,
but you're right.
2 in the morning.
They're coming and going, perpetually deciding to stay or leave.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the longer I'm an adult and a human among other humans, the more I know that our mind, I mean, it's not taking relationships for granted. It's not taking love for granted. It's not feeling entitled to anyone's affection.
Yeah.
Yeah. But there's a Willa Cather quote that always, I don't know, stays with me, and it says, the heart of another is always a dark forest, or something of that.
Yeah.
It's the unknowable in the other.
Oh, that I agree on. And if you get to know it, it's over.
That may be true. A little mystery goes a long way.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
We could do like a love podcast or like an advice podcast.
I will.
Yeah.
Let's talk about something besides the story, because I feel like I'm going to. I mean, there's other things. So I do want to talk about, actually. Can we just say one? I want to talk about How Strange a Season, and yes, that's very much also this season of these women's lives, and they're at like some crossroads. Like, you know, am I leaving him, or how do I make this? You know, how do I relate with my grandmother? She left me this house, but it's clear she didn't love me. You know, or how do I make this peach farm work and protect my siblings and still like be intact? They're all at some crossroads, like any good story. So that's Strange a Season. But I know that you've done so much work about the environment and how did like global warming and other things affect. I mean, I see it, so I'm not going to give you the answer.
Right.
But could you tell a little bit? Yeah.
Yeah. Let me know if I get it right.
Okay. Good.
Now I've forgotten the question, which is bad.
How did global warming, like How Strange a Season is emotional,
right.
but isn't it also like actually in the world a season, like
okay.
a real season?
It came back to me what I was going to say.
Yeah.
So I think so much a part of that is about our individual negotiation with what we owe others versus what we owe ourselves. Of like when we, you know, there's so many ways to spend yourself. So when do you spend yourself on self-actualization versus service? You know, where is that boundary? How do you negotiate that in a relationship or with, you know, serving the planet, or, you know, activism versus the self, you know, all the different negotiations we have that way. So I think that's, you know, the undercurrent. And in the last 10 years when I should have been writing this book, I was parenting and flailing.
Got it.
And
check.
Writing a lot of environmental journalism for The Guardian, because it's really that's really what kept me up at night. That's what was spinning in my mind. I think I sat in church a lot, like a lot of Southern children do, and it made me a little moralistic and righteous, and that's something I have to contend with in myself, and I have to contend with it in my environmentalism. And so I try to channel anything that's too righteous or too issue-based toward environmental writing. And I have this amazing editor at The Guardian who really lets me write sort of literary versions of environmental journalism. It's been deeply fulfilling. But anything I feel like that goes more toward the spiritual aspect of environmental degradation, you know, I feel like we really underestimated the tax and the toll that that's going to have on us spiritually and emotionally. And I think that's something that fiction can get into that journalism can't. So that's the part I try to bring to the book or to the fiction work.
Yeah, I could not agree more that the soul tax of the end of the planet is, I'm not joking, I know that I put it in a glib way, but not just to our children who are demoralized, but the grief that it feels in a very deep way. Like when the peach trees are just dried up and there's no peaches, and she's like, I mean, it's almost hilarious. She's taking like a watering can and pouring them on the peach trees. And I know in Alaska, like, I go home and it's summer and it's 90 degrees. I mean, we never had that. And not only did we not have that, we didn't even have spring. There was no such thing. Growing up, there was no spring. It's called the breakup. The breakup is when the ice breaks up, and it takes 3 days, and then it's over. But now all of a sudden we have spring.
Yeah.
We never had a fall. Fall was 3 days. The leaves fell off. First of all, there's no deciduous trees. There weren't any deciduous trees. They didn't live. And whatever one were like somebody bought them and like at a nursery and planted them, or some birch trees, right? And it'd be like this, fall, goodbye. They would literally just fall off. And they'd be like, okay, it's winter's butt cold. It's like October 15th. And Halloween, we used to just like, there was no point in costumes. You know what I'm saying? Like you just wore your snowsuit.
I just revere
and then you just said, I'm a gypsy.
Yeah.
And they go, okay, do you want candy?
Yeah.
Nobody, now there's like a full Halloween. And it's a loss. It's weird.
Yeah, and what you're describing is, I think climate change and environmental degradation is a very visual shift. It's something you can see, and it's atmospheric, and it's tied to grief. I mean, there's a lot that happens in that, even just hearing you describe that. By the way, I think you're amazing for surviving several years in the real Alaska, because I can't make it through a Vermont winter without
That's not
totally
true. I love
losing
it. I can't stand that heat. I literally, the minute the clock turns June 1st in New York City, I am out like a lightning.
This is where we
I leave my
diverge.
children behind.
Yeah.
Finish it up, I'll meet you later.
Yeah.
I'm not kidding. I literally remember one time we were living in Carroll Gardens, and it was like August, and we'd moved to this basement apartment, and we had fleas. Okay.
That's a tough
And the
break.
new apartment had roaches, and it was like 107 degrees. And because it was a basement apartment, you couldn't put in air conditioning. Like there was just one window unit in the bath. And I said, and also my little son was obsessed with Les Miserables and was listening to it on repeat. And I just looked at the two of them, and I feel so bad about this. Who does this? We had this friend of my friend's daughter came to stay with us to help, and I just said goodbye. I booked a ticket to Alaska. I left the next morning, and I said, enjoy. I'll see you in September.
Well, see, I do this in Vermont. In
Do you? I left.
In February, I just lose it, and I get to
and then
that
you go
cold,
home, right?
hardened place, and I just think, goodbye, children.
Yeah, you go south, or you go to the
Can't take
heat,
this.
and I go to the cold.
Yeah, I need light. It's not even the heat; it's the light.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I've seen the pictures too. Do we have to
we
have
do
to ask
Q&A?
questions now? Okay. Can somebody ask a question about Megan's tugboat? Because we haven't talked about it yet.
I'm going to go ahead and ask a Zoom question while the rest of you who are here think of your question and go ahead and get in line. Megan, Melissa Malouf asks, what is your take on the descriptions of your new collection as disquieting, unforgiving, and so forth? Have you read these reviews?
I have. I mean, I think I'm supposed to say no. I don't ever read my reviews, but no, I did. I think I am both a ferocious and tender person, sort of like we were talking about. I'm a gentle firework. So I think I like both things to coexist. I like the power in the tension between the two. I sort of like that some reviewers picked up on the sort of disquieting, savage part of the book, whether it's about the patriarchy or labor or deeply flawed parts of Southern heritage. You know, that is in the collection, and there is strong heat and terror around those issues. I think about when I used to work at Bennington College, I helped run the Frost House, and when I was doing that, I learned of this review he got where somebody said, Robert Frost is a terrifying poet, and it made his career. So I'm just going to assume that's going to do the same for me. So, hi, Melissa, and thank you.
Disquieting is a really good word for those stories, because if you weren't interested in the human condition and you read across them, you'd say, oh, okay, I get it. But actually there's so much to unpack in that subtlety. I really envy it. Like, it is very subtle what you're doing, but it is completely there.
Thank you. Yeah, I wanted the reader to feel unsettled. Sorry.
All
That's
right.
what I want for you.
Well, one of the characters, for example, at the Lake George thing, so her husband basically goes to historic houses and razes them to the ground and builds like McMansions. And she likes it. And you sort of understand why later, because her past has been so upsetting. I'm extrapolating?
You're doing a great job.
Am I? Okay. Because she doesn't actually say it. But that was my impression, that she was just like, okay, that's pretty, I don't care. I need it to be shiny and new. I need there to be a possibility. And at the end, she says something to begin over and over again. I mean, it's really interesting how you threaded how she swims and comes up to the surface as a rebirth, and then the house is torn down and rebuilt as a rebirth, and the old dress cast aside. I mean, I feel a little bit like Grace Paley does that sometimes, where she'll have like a thesis and then just show you one example and another example.
I'll take that comparison.
But were you doing that on purpose? I mean, I think you were, right?
I mean, I trust my subconscious mind to do a lot of work. So if it's happening at that level.
Yeah.
But I do think there's something that I wanted some of these characters to be unlikable because they're participating in unsustainable systems and harmful systems. And sometimes I don't think we talk about the horror of that passive participation in problematic systems. It's a hard thing to write, I think. But that's sort of happening.
Yeah, you know, when you're like, I'm not going to recycle this today.
Yeah.
No, I'm serious.
Yeah, no, I do it with the peanut butter if the dogs can't get it done.
Right.
Yeah.
You're like, I'm not going to wash it out.
Yeah.
And I know that they probably don't have that
Amy knows.
7. I know they do 1, 2, and 3, but do they really do 7 triangle? I'm just going to throw that.
That's a good question. I mean, I'm not going to admit to anything on tape right now.
Okay, I will.
We've got one more question from someone on Zoom. Megan, what is the meaning to you of writing about female protagonists and centering female experiences? And is there an intersection between that and the environment for you? This is from Els van Wart. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name.
You got it right. And Els is such a strong woman herself. Female goalkeeper for Middlebury and a science-oriented woman. So thank you, Els, for that question. And I do think I really wanted the experiences of women to be a cornerstone of the book. When I first started writing, someone told me, you know, the New Yorker doesn't like female-centric stories, which I don't think is necessarily true, but this is like 15 years ago, and someone was like, if you want to be published, you need to write a more masculine story.
No, that is actually, it's not true anymore, but in the 1990s, I know as young women writers and so many things, or even the early 2000s, they were like, if you want to be taken seriously, you need a male narrator of your novel, or write from a man's perspective.
Yeah.
And that's what Claire V. Watkins.
Totally, the on-pandering piece. I mean, it was very much...
It was painful to read it because I realized how much I'd internalized.
Same. And it was that passive sort of, if you want to succeed, write this way. Or, you know the gatekeepers, you know the sensibilities. And...
They'd also say, it was so ambitious. She wrote from a man's perspective. I remember that being said to me, and I thought...
masculine prose, or,
Yeah, ambitious.
I mean, the great thing about being a short story writer, I won't say that I'm irrelevant. I'm not, but it's it's sort of like I can take chances in the short form that I feel like maybe I couldn't elsewhere, and I really wanted to lean into places that are complicated. To get back to what I was saying earlier about the ways we tend to ourselves versus tending to others, because that's a central concern in my life, and I. Sometimes don't know which way to go and sort of accept that I have both in me.
Yeah.
A strong commitment to self as an individual and a strong commitment to a family unit or a society. But yes, that was a huge part of the book. And I'm 42. I feel like I know some things now that maybe I didn't know 10 years ago when I was first writing. And I would hope that my writing has gotten better, but that also my thinking through living.
Remember at the end of Peaches 1979 when you wrote, "How wrong would it be to save myself?" she wondered, looking up at the watercolor sky. "And only myself."
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I love that. That open
Is that where we
realization.
end?
I don't know, but is there any other questions?
Any questions from anyone here? We've got time for one more. Or we'll just skip to the part where we sign books.
That sounds great. Thank you guys for taking time out of your night to be here.
Wonderful.